This is generally the view of people. Oh, we don't know much about Assange. Well, you should know, because whether you know it or not, he is fighting for you.
For your courage and leadership and tenacity in journalism and publishing.
Since 2010, Assange has been held in progressively narrower, darker, colder, and crueler spaces.
He has been detained since the 7th of December 2010 in one form or another.
And we are now here after years of imprisonment.
WikiLeaks is a non-state hostile intelligence service.
I think the man is a high-tech terrorist.
A high-tech terrorist.
A traitor, a treasonous.
He has to answer for what he has done.
Assange faces up to 175 years in prison for publishing classified documents exposing U.S. war crimes.
The U.S. government narrative about Julian is a complete fraud. It is a complete fraud from A to Z.
Julian took on the most powerful countries in the world, basically all of them.
We now have confirmed that there were plans to kidnap Julian here in the center of London, or even assassinate him.
No one who instigated that illegal and immoral war has been brought to justice. But the great truth teller sits behind bars.
If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth.
Julian Assange is a hero.
What if everything we thought we knew about somebody was a lie? Would we be willing to go on a new journey of understanding? This is a story of deception, lies, bravery, and a man who risked everything to bring the truth to light.
Mr. Assange shows all the symptoms that are typical for a person that has been exposed to psychological torture over a prolonged period of time.
He looked at me intensely and said, "I hate to say this." He then hesitated, visibly troubled and searching for words. And then he finally said, "Please, save my life."
May future generations have the ability to speak without restraint. May our children and their children know truth and have access to information that leads to justice. Wherever Julian goes, free speech goes with him.
If there is a bird that is about to take flight, stretch her wings and rule the skies, may it be a peace dove and no longer a bald eagle.
If you think Assange is a traitor, he's a rapist, he's a narcissist, he's a hacker, I don't blame you, because you have been deceived. And if you think you've not been deceived, that's normal, because otherwise it wouldn't be deception.
Hello and welcome back to another live stream from the ZD Geopolitics team. I am your host, Sarah, and I am joined tonight by Kym Staton. Kym Staton is an Australian filmmaker, poet, and musician from Northern Rivers in New South Wales. He is the writer and director of the preview that you just saw, The Trust Fall, Julian Assange, and the founder and director of Films for Change. In 2023, he won an award for Best Emerging Director in Australia at the Melbourne Documentary Film Festival. Kym, how are you tonight? It's very nice to have you.
Very well, thanks, Sarah. Thanks for having me.
It's a really great time for you to come on as we're talking about Assange and freedom of speech as the United States ironically gets ready to continue their crusade against free speech. So we kind of need to talk about Julian more now than ever. So how did you get started and what inspired you to do this film for Julian?
Well, Sarah, in 2010, I happened to be sitting on the couch in the living room watching the mainstream news, and I saw a black and white video up on the screen. It was a group of people on a street corner in Iraq, and they were shot dead by a helicopter, an American helicopter flying overhead. And one man was, they were civilians, including two Reuters journalists. and one of the men was crawling around, barely alive on the ground. A van pulls up, some other civilians trying to help, and then the helicopter shoots up the van with 2 children inside. And that image was so shocking to me, and it stuck in my mind. And it was there for years, and I eventually found out that that was a video released by WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. I gradually took an interest in the issue, started watching various documentaries, and then 3 years ago, I decided to make a film myself.
Well, that's fantastic. I can remember when I saw that video and being in the United States, I was actually in the military when it came out. So that was like huge. And then being terrified that that's what we were actually doing. So I definitely reciprocate the feelings. Can you tell our listeners why it's called the trust fall? And I know we all know what a trust fall is, but who or what was Julian kind of trust falling into?
Sure. Well, surprisingly, quite a few people don't know what a trust fall is and don't recognize the pose that Julian's doing. And it was the title came from something that I wrote about halfway through the project. I was working on the narration, and every morning I was just writing a little bit each day as a sort of a routine to gradually work up this final chapter of the film in particular. At that stage, I'd learned so much. I'd spoken to people like Daniel Ellsberg, the legendary Pentagon Papers whistleblower, John Pilger, Stella Assange, Tariq Ali, all of these incredible thinkers and speakers, and I just learned a lot about how Julian had been treated. I was really deep into it. I was full of rage, full of emotion. It was a really traumatic thing to study this topic and to understand how much Julian has suffered throughout all of this. And then at the same time, I became aware that he actually was well informed and had a really deep knowledge of what can happen to whistleblowers when they reveal crimes and those that publish them, Julian being a publisher, not a whistleblower. This question came up around that time, which was, did Julian know the consequences? Did he know what could happen? And I came to understand that he fully well knew what could happen. He'd read about many whistleblowers and publishers and people that had been persecuted, writers, dissidents. He was well studied on that. And from well before he started WikiLeaks, he knew what would happen. I mean, the whole concept of WikiLeaks, the innovation of it was to protect whistleblowers from the sort of thing that has happened to, people like Daniel Ellsberg and many other whistleblowers over hundreds of years. So I came to this understanding that Julian knew what would likely happen, what could happen to him. He knew how they might come after him. He was quoted in 2010 prior to releasing the diplomatic cables, the Cablegate, as it's called, on the WikiLeaks website, revealing, the goings on in the Democratic Party in the US, Hillary Clinton taking millions of dollars of bribes from Saudi Arabia, and many other things in Cablegate. And so at that time, he was quoted as saying to Jennifer Robinson, "They will chase me to the ends of the earth, but it's my obligation to bring this information to the public." And so I had these sort of two ideas in my head. It was one thing that he knew what could happen, and the other thing was the terrible ordeal that he's been through. I sort of had this vision of Julian, his whole trajectory of his life over this 14 years since they've come after him has been like a fall, as if he's just falling and no one knows how far he's going to fall. And then on the flip side, he knew that this could happen. And so I just visualized a trust fall, which is not everyone knows, but it's an activity that you do. They do sometimes in community team building exercises and retreats and things like that, self-development courses. And it's just this act where you basically close your eyes and you fall backwards into a crowd. And it sounds very innocuous, but the act of doing it is actually quite scary, because you have to trust that people are going to catch you. And so that concept came out of this combination of the trust that Julian had in the public. Basically, for him to go out and print this information, he was hoping that public awareness would grow faster than the chagrin of the powerful, of all the governments that he'd exposed and all the enemies that he was creating. And so he was hoping that the public would catch him to save him from what would happen to him.
Do you think that since Julian's arrest that the things the behavior of journalists has changed at all? Do you think that journalists have become more revealing, or have they kind of shrunken back, or have they become less daring because of Assange's treatment?
Yeah, I think over the last 10, 15 years, there's been an incredible reduction in the amount of whistleblower material, publishing journalism, true journalism, exposing crimes, exposing truth. This is all a strategy of the elites to reduce the dissemination of truth through whistleblowing websites and through courageous journalism. There's over 500 journalists in prison today around the world for their work. And Assange is just one of those 500. It's censorship. It's a increasing thing. Often journalists describe, many people have been quoted as saying, if Julian is extradited, it will have a chilling effect on journalism. But I think we're already in an ice age of journalism. If you're a journalist of any sort of skill and credential and experience, you're probably going to get interesting, important material on your desk every now and then. And surely the first thing that comes to mind when somebody gets something really juicy is, what if they, Assange me, basically? What if they come after me? And there are so many journalists currently in recent years that have been jailed and pursued, and not just in the so-called countries where dictatorships. It's not just those countries. It's also in the West.
Do you think that the fact that journalists now are either self-censoring or actively being censored, that people that are actually dedicated to the craft are now becoming disenchanted with it, and it's kind of attracting more nefarious kind of characters, maybe more propagandist type characters?
Yeah, well, what we've had, WikiLeaks was so significant in the world of media because it was really the first time that a publishing company had taken on the mainstream narrative. Nowadays, we have all of these hopefully somewhat free speech platforms, Rumble and BitChute, Telegram, so on. That to some degree, independent journalists can have a level of free speech. Some other kind of narrative can come out. But at the time, in 2006, this was unheard of. It just didn't exist yet, really, to any sort of significant level. And so, that was such an enormous, momentous thing historically for a platform to be invented that could take on the mainstream narrative and put out information that was 100% true and 100% transparent. WikiLeaks has never had to redact anything because they did their due diligence. They checked the sources. They were so careful and fastidious about that. And now this anonymous Dropbox has become a normal thing. Many platforms use it. And then we have these independent media sources, but of course there's lots and lots of made up stories and theories and rumors that just pretty much dominate these platforms. And so now we have, these two extremes. On one side, you have the government narratives, the corporate narratives coming out through the mainstream, where we're being lied to. It's all propaganda. And then on the other side, you have this sort of extremist, sensationalist sort of rumor spreading, basically a rumor mill of conjecture and people just pretty much, making up stories. And so where do we find the truth? We really, really need a WikiLeaks. We need a massive, powerful, independent source of information that's truthful.
Oh, 100%. So moving on to the kind of the judiciary side, is there a list or could you tell our listeners some of the procedural violations from the UK's judicial process?
Oh, are you referring to the ways that they've violated Julian's rights?
Yes.
Yeah, well, to start with, this whole act of the US government aiming to pluck an Australian journalist from London, he's not an American citizen, and to just use their power and influence and weight to force the Five Eyes Alliance, the Australia, Sweden, a few other countries involved, Ecuador, they're not part of the Five Eyes Alliance, but whatever governments that they feel like they can, everyone just has to basically do what they're told in this act of extraditing Julian Assange, an Australian journalist, to America to face laws under which he's not even a citizen of that country. This in the first case, this is a completely crazy idea. And then also there is a agreement, an extradition agreement between America and the UK in regards to extraditing. That they're not allowed to extradite someone on a political basis. It's an extradition agreement. They're breaching that because Julian is definitely a political prisoner. They'll try to pretend that that's not the case. And so many other examples, and his human rights are being violated on about 10 different ways, from keeping him in Belmarsh prison, solitary confinement, 22 hours a day for 5 years, is considered by many human rights groups as a violation of human rights, as torture. It's defined as torture in the Istanbul Protocol and various other human rights documents. And then they've ignored all of this evidence. Pretty much everything that the Assange's defense has brought up in this extradition trial, so-called trial, has been ignored, from Sigurdur Thordarson, the star witness for the US, admitted in a radio interview that with a media called Stunden, he admitted that he lied in the testimony, that Assange didn't tell him to hack the computers, from that time that they were supposedly working together. And from the United States getting access to the footage from inside the embassy, spying on Assange's lawyers and Julian and any visitors to the embassy, that was also a violation of his rights. They're accusing him of espionage while they're actually committing espionage on Julian Assange.
We do have some clips here, and I want to share them with our listeners because the film is not out yet, and I was spoiled enough to get to watch it, and you don't. So we're going to share some short clips, and we'll touch on them after clip number 1.
The media is completely manipulated and controlled, and more so now than ever before. And so into this world came WikiLeaks.
This disclosure is about the truth. The single greatest contributor to our expanding horizon is you. You telling your friends what's up, what you saw, what you believe, and who's full of it. You form part of the largest bullshit detecting machine the world has ever seen.
Do we need another large bullshit detecting machine? I think we do at this point.
Yeah, what I loved about that clip that we trolled through hundreds of hours of interviews and clips to choose things to put into the film, and what I love about that is he's so down to earth, almost humorous when he says the largest bullshit detecting machine. It's Aussie slang, this bullshit term, and he's trying to appeal to everyday people and just come down to our level. But the whole idea of WikiLeaks was to circumvent the national security agencies, and for the first time to bring information, instead of upwards, to bring it downwards to the people, to use encryption for the first time to bring this information to us. And encryption had always been something at the time, anyway, that only the elite, the governments, the authorities were using. And his idea was, let's use encryption to protect whistleblowers and bring that information out to us.
So what do you think about the recent well, actually, I'm just going to show the second clip. We'll show the second clip and then we'll discuss it.
He was a young man with vision and big ideas, and the most massive leak and the most important leak that had ever occurred in his backpack.
And he's so young, and it's just so great to see him so like young and like Julian, like I remember Julian. I did want to ask a little bit, because Julian, obviously with Julian, the topic of free speech and self-censorship and censorship in the media. And I don't know if you've seen, but we're really dealing with a tug of war here in the United States. We're just getting ready to pass some anti-Semitism laws that are, I don't know, but we looked at those, and then we kind of have a tug of war between the tech sector and the government, because Elon's a little bit rogue, not totally, but he's still too rogue for the US government's taste. What do you think Julian would have to say about this kind of current situation that's sort of going on we have people on Twitter or other platforms that are really trying to push out information that maybe the governments don't want us, and then we have a government that's trying to regulate it with weird free speech laws, and it's very interesting.
Yeah, look, we had a similar thing here in Australia. It was Elon Musk was asked by the Australian government to take down footage of the I believe a Anglican bishop that was, there was attempted stabbing while he was giving a sermon in Western Sydney, and that footage was put up on X platform, and the Australian government wanted it taken down, and Elon said, no, this is a free speech platform, which is false anyway. He definitely shadow bans whatever he wants to and uses a platform for his own gains. But it was kind of entertaining to see that sort of stouch between Elon Musk and Australian government, and as I understand, Musk won that. The Australian government backs down, and I think that what that represents is that these big tech billionaires are really having so much control. They're operating like countries of their own. They can use their money and influence to sort of have some amount of autonomy in the world. What Julian, what would he think of that? I have no idea. I mean, he would just be so sad of the state of the world, the state of disinformation and censorship, and he was warning about that so like more than a decade ago. Before WikiLeaks, he was writing all sorts of articles and books about censorship and about the control of the internet. He believes that the internet is the best thing that's ever happened to the world to connect everybody together, and has incredible ability, potential to bring truthful information out and educate people. And essentially, WikiLeaks is a source of is a form of education. There's a terrific quote of Julian that I really like, along the lines of education is the way to justice. So way back then he was trying to warn people about censorship and the control of the internet, and here it is happening. And if he was aware of that, if he doesn't have access to the internet in Belmarsh prison, and he was involved in the early days of the internet, bringing it to Australia. A local guy that was a friend, someone that told me about a story that he went to school with Julian Assange, and they were friends. And because I've been in touch with a whole lot of people through the course of making the film, and people have sent me photos and told me stories about Julian, and so lots of interesting insights. And so this fellow said that Julian was really frustrated that he couldn't make calls overseas, before the days of Skype and Zoom, and it was too expensive to make calls overseas. And so he went out into the street, hacked into the phone lines and rigged it up to his house, ran some lines from the nearest telephone hub, and so that he could make free international calls. And the police came along and found something going on and traced it back to the house, followed the cables back into his house. And people have sent me photos of him with massive piles of servers in their hands, where he must be late teens or early 20s. He was trying to set up an internet hub in his living room. He was just so brilliant with computers, and onto the internet in the early days. And he knew that it was going to be taken over by corporate elites and manipulated.
Has Julian made any comments lately about the current climate? I don't even know what to call it.
The last comment that I'm aware of was in regards to what's happening in Gaza, and he made a comment about the number of journalists that have been killed doing their job there. So rather than sort of taking side and getting all political with that, he just wanted to highlight that journalists are caught in the crossfire, and innocent victims, which he's seen happen over and over again, and he's one of them himself.
Well, I think that was an important thing to highlight, especially while not bringing undue unwanted attention on himself, but that they killed so many journalists, but that they did it on purpose, and exactly for the reasons that Julian is locked up now. So it's all just silencing, and if the State of Israel needs to kill them to do that, then that's fine too. But that probably was his what was his best move in that instance. But and here's that third excerpt.
He looked at me intensely and said, "I hate to say this." He then hesitated, visibly troubled and searching for words, and then he finally said, "Please, save my life."
What was this part? What was happening in this part of the movie, or this flashback?
Well, that was the voice of Nils Melzer, and he's reading an excerpt from his fantastic book, The Trial of Julian Assange, which you can pick up online and so on. Highly recommend this book. It's so well written. It's so insightful. Nils Melzer, for those that don't know, is the former Special Rapporteur on Torture from the United Nations. So he was in that role very recently, just finished that role around 2 years ago, a year and a half. He visited Julian Assange in prison along with two other doctors, Pau Perez Sales, a Spanish doctor, and another doctor, I can't recall the name right now. They visited Julian to assess him under the Istanbul Protocol for torture. And what they determined was that he is a victim of torture, of psychological torture. So what we did in that animation was we had Nils Melzer provided an audio recording of an excerpt from his book, and then we had it animated because, of course, we weren't there to capture that scene. And as Nils Melzer is explaining, is that when they finished that meeting, that examination, Julian was appealing to him to save his life, and it was also discovered that Julian had hidden a razor blade in his cell so that if he's extradited, he would take his own life, and that would be a better option than ending up in the hands of his tormentors and being tortured further in the American system. And the Assange defense did, in a way, kind of win the first stage of the extradition trial. Judge Barretzer decided that he was likely to commit suicide, and prevented the extradition or postponed it at that stage, about midway through the extradition trial. But then the US was allowed to further appeal, and then they basically won the next stage.
And we have one last clip.
The way he came to form WikiLeaks was a kind of a iterative process over time. It's like winemaking, you know? He had a lot of ingredients, had to be fine-tuned. He had whiteboards that he'd rescued from tips, so his house had whiteboards in every room. Some people had paintings or posters, and most of the whiteboards were filled with things. Sometimes they were equations. Sometimes the equations were filled with just words and reflecting a mathematical language of a social phenomenon. And what he could see was that information was becoming transferable, copyable at little to no cost in large quantities. And so that churning desire for this deeper social change, combined with these other overlays enabled by technology, I think just meant that everything came together at the right moment for him.
What were the conditions about technology that kind of made it like the perfect storm for Julian in that moment? And would he be able to replicate that in the current climate that we have now?
Yeah, well, back in 2006, it was, such an early stage in internet, and, this ability to pass around documents with very little cost involved, and the lack of any kind of whistleblowing website, the protection of whistleblowers. So these things hadn't been invented. That idea of protecting whistleblowers with encryption wasn't in existence. And so, my understanding is that Julian has been on a mission to do something about corruption his whole life. I've also had bits and pieces shared with me about his earlier life, and we in the film, due to being short on time, we just started from his university days just prior to his formulation of the WikiLeaks concept. But a story that someone told me from his earlier childhood was that somebody that contacted me and provided some photos, and she worked with Christine Assange, Julian's mother, when Julian was a boy. The two women worked together, and their young sons would play together, and they would come to her house, and she asked Julian one day, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" And he said, "I'm going to end corruption in the world." And prior to WikiLeaks, he also helped the Victorian police crack down a pedophile ring. I think he's been on that mission his whole life. And also in that interview, the woman there with the pink scarf is Suella Dreyfus, who's probably the most renowned encryption expert in Australia. She's a professor at the University of Melbourne. It was an amazing interview. She was so articulate, and she knew Julian from the early days of the internet. So they were very interested in what the internet was capable of, and they were on chat rooms and exchanging ideas, and that's how she got to know Julian. And they also released a book, I can't remember the title, but there was a book about the early days of hacking, in that young life that Julian had as a as an ethical hacker, looking into what, how businesses, how corporations and governments function, never stealing anything, by the way. And, so she said that he was really perturbed by making the discovery that at the University of Melbourne, you had projects there being researched and funded by arms companies, by weapons manufacturers, were making use of brilliant students there and brilliant professors to basically come up with more effective ways. He was really put off by that, and that's what Suella Dreyfus related to me. And I don't think that we didn't end up having time to put that in the film, but these are all really important glimpses into the vision, the ideas of Julian Assange, and the mission that he was on to end wars. To bring about peace through transparency, and that famous famous quote: "If wars can be started by lies, peace can be started by truth." We get this picture of Julian Assange, which is very, very different to the one that the mainstream media have portrayed for more than a decade now, of Julian being a traitor and a criminal, some sort of dodgy character that steals information. And what that obscures for everyday people is that Julian was a visionary. He was on a mission to end corruption and to end wars in the world.
Could you give us a rundown of Julian's current situation? I know there was a recent court hearing in the UK, and the results of that, if you could tell our listeners and refresh their memory.
Yeah, so the extradition trial is sort of gradually, very slowly coming to an end. On the 20th and 21st of February, the UK High Court was expected to hand down a decision as to whether Julian would be extradited or whether another appeal would be permitted. And on that day, that 2-day hearing in London, the High Court, they basically decided to ask the US for assurances, for 3 different assurances, in order for the extradition to be permitted. So they were given 7 weeks to provide those assurances. On the very final day of that window, everything's drawn out in this case as much as possible. They did provide this sort of 3-page document of assurances, but when you read them carefully, as I did, you discover that they're actually non-assurances, especially on, well, let me tell you the 3 grounds of the assurances they requested. Number 1 was that if Julian is extradited, his charge wouldn't be upgraded to a charge that could carry a capital offense, and that he couldn't be executed, put to death in America. Then the second one was that as he is an Australian citizen, he would still have free speech First Amendment protections during the upcoming potential court case in America for the 18 charges under the Espionage Act, the bogus charges that he's up for. And then the third one was also around prejudice, that he wouldn't be prejudiced against, so as an Australian citizen. And so the US provided this document in regards to whether he could be executed in America. They gave a standard assurance, not very convincing, especially that this is the very country that actually plotted to kill him. They're known to break their word on assurances. The second one was in regards to the free speech protections, and they stated that he could seek to apply for those assurances, for that protection, free speech protection, but it was up to the US court as to whether he would get that. So that's a non-assurance. And I think they also made a comment in regards that he wouldn't be prejudiced against as an Australian on trial in America. So now the next step is on the 20th of May, so that's 17 days away, is the next hearing at the High Court again in the UK in London, where we'll find out whether those assurances are deemed to be sufficient for him to be extradited. And he could be on a CIA plane immediately that day, or they could allow another appeal. It seems to me most likely that they'll allow an appeal, that the UK High Court will decide that the assurances are insufficient, which will mean another appeal. That'll mean 6 months more for Julian to be in solitary confinement, 22 hours a day in a 6-meter square cell. And if you look at the timeline of this, if you go from the 20th of May, add 6 months, it's very interesting that this conveniently takes them 2 weeks past the next US election. I think that's really significant. Alternatively, if he is extradited, they can apply, his defense can apply to the European Court of Human Rights to take it up with them. Possibly they might be able to prevent the extradition, although no one seems really content that is possible. It's just something that they can explore. So it's really dire situation for him. He's basically either going to be enduring additional psychological torture in that solitary confinement conditions at Belmarsh prison, or he's going to be on a CIA plane to America. And even though they made that assurance that he wouldn't be given the death penalty, let's realize that the 18-count bogus indictment against him carries a 175-year prison sentence, which is a virtual death sentence.
You mentioned the United States presidential election. Do you think that which outcome is preferable, or does it not even matter at this point?
You just broke up there a bit. Do you mean the outcome of Biden and Trump?
Yes.
Yeah, well, look, to me, there's not that much difference between Trump and Biden. Biden is quoted in the film. He said that Assange is a high-tech terrorist. He's never said anything in support of Julian. Biden continually spouts about, the protection of free speech and that journalism is not a crime, but he continues to persecute Assange and allow further censorship of the media, control of the media. Trump, on the other hand, gives a whole lot of mixed messages. He at one stage, his first statement was WikiLeaks. I love WikiLeaks. Not long after, he said, I don't know anything about WikiLeaks. He's been quoted as saying that Julian should be given the death penalty. Who knows where he stands these days? Everyone was hoping that he would pardon Assange when he came to the end of his term a few years ago. That didn't happen. He pardoned gangsters and rappers and hardened criminals. He didn't do anything about Assange. Is that because he was coerced or threatened? We won't know. So I don't think there's any hope that either of these presidents will do the right thing. And there is. It's worth noting that Robert F. Kennedy has said that he would pardon Assange on day one if he became president. And Jill Stein is also running for president, the Greens Party, and she's been an incredible supporter of Assange for many years, very outspoken, and so she would surely do the right thing. But I don't think either of them have any chance to get in. So it's really a choice between. It reminds me of a quote of Julian Assange. I can't remember the exact words, but someone asked him, to choose between, what do you prefer between Clinton and Trump? And he said, well, that's like choosing between syphilis and gonorrhea. Or something like that. It wasn't that exact.
If people would love to know where they can, or what is most beneficial to write or to try to pressure our representatives, how can people help Julian, especially anonymous options? Monetary, etc.
Yeah, well, there's so many ways you can do something and say something. And one thing you can do is write a letter to Julian. It has to be a traditional on-paper snail mail letter. If you Google that, right to Julian Assange. There'll be various websites with instructions. It has to be done a very particular way because otherwise they're going to confiscate the mail. So you have to follow the Belmarsh rules. But he does enjoy receiving letters from supporters and just hearing about the outside world because he's so isolated in there with no access to the internet and very few visitors. Just Google Assange petition, sign every petition that you can find. Join your local Assange group if there is one. Many cities in the world have Assange groups on Facebook. And what else? If whatever talents you have, use them. My partner, our co-producer Natalia Mignano, and I had some background in the documentary industry, and so we made a film. It really challenged us and stretched us, but because this is our first documentary, but we were determined to do it. And thanks to the support of thousands of people crowdfunding the film, it was made possible. And that's an example of how we can, if we're inspired to take action, we can do things that are outside our comfort zone. And I really encourage people to just do something and say something, and because that's what's needed to solve this. I really feel that we can't, we can blame governments and blame the law and blame our failed democracy. But at the end of the day, I really think that this problem exists, this persecution and suffering of Julian Assange exists because of our ignorance, of my ignorance and your ignorance and everyone else that was slow to get onto this, and the lack of awareness. There's so many people that don't know what's going on, not willing to take the time. We really have to be willing to look at independent media sources, find the truth, find out what's going on in our communities, in the global community, and support whistleblowers. Don't see whistleblowers as some kind of rebel or criminal. This information deserves to be in front of our eyes. When it's crimes of the powerful, we should be able to see it. Going back to your question, what can people do? You can support the Assange legal campaign. Look up Stella Assange's website. Stella Assange is Julian's wife, and so she's needing support, of course, because she's advocating for him full time. If you want to support the film, Google the Trustful GoFundMe, and we'd love to have any help that we can get to continue to share this film out to the world. And it's just, there's endless ways that people can make a difference on this issue.
Well, the film is astounding. It's 2 hours, and a documentary of 2 hours is usually like, all right, you got to break this up. But I couldn't stop watching it. It was really fantastic, and I'm so grateful that you even offered me the opportunity. Where can everyone else see it, and when does it premiere?
I'm glad you liked it, and very pleased to share it with you, and that you found it interesting and powerful. Well, it's currently in cinemas in Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. In Australia and New Zealand, it's been out in cinemas for 4 months now and still going, which is really encouraging. Overall, we've had something like 1,400 screenings, over 300 cinemas. So the uptake from cinemas has been incredible. That's included many screenings by the mainstream chains. In Australia, Event Cinemas, Village and Hoyts have shown it. Event Cinemas, it's a major chain in New Zealand, have shown the film. And then in the UK, currently we have Odeon, the UK's largest cinema chain, will be showing the film this coming Wednesday night, the 8th of May, at 87 Odeon sites. So all over England, Ireland, Scotland, Wales, many opportunities to watch the film. And I really encourage people, I'm sure a lot of your audience are politically minded and quite knowledgeable on politics and interested in what's going on in the world, but people that have come across this video and are not into politics, please don't be scared to watch this film. It's definitely not a cold, dry, boring political film. It's very artistic. It's very educational, and it's all laid out very clearly. And as you said yourself, Sarah, you won't be bored watching this at all, because the film is a journey of understanding. It's not a journey in time, but rather it's a journey of our comprehension of what has occurred here.
I learned a great deal. I didn't follow Julian very close until recently, but I learned a great deal. And the way that the film kind of examined these things, instead of it being like a timeline of events, it was really powerful. And you guys have to check it out. Some of the some of the people, the interviewees on there are astounding. John Pilger, which may he rest in peace. Jill Stein, Jeffrey Sachs, who's one of my favorites. Chris Hedges, also incredible. And obviously, you can't have an Assange documentary without the lovely Roger Waters. Well, Kym, thank you so much. It has been an amazing time. Where can people find you, and what are you working on, new projects, or are we just hanging out with Julian for a little while?
Yeah, I'm on most of the social media platforms, and the Trustful is on most of the socials, and trustful.org is our website. I'll be tied up with publicity and the distribution of the film for, I think, at least another year. It's going to be, it depends on the outcome for Julian, of course. We always hope that any day that some miracle will occur, and the governments responsible will actually protect free speech for the first time. But as long as Julian needs our help, we're going to continue to provide it, and we'll keep sharing this film until he is free. That's what we've pledged to do, and we'll be busy with that for many months and maybe even years, to bring it out to every country of the world and having it translated into different languages and all of that, and taking it from cinema then through to streaming and television. So that's going to be keeping me busy, and I have no idea whether I'll make another documentary. This one was really tiring, really challenging. It stretched me in all directions, and I'm so grateful for Julian Assange for inspiring that sort of challenge and stretching of my abilities, because when somebody does this courageous act where they take on powerful governments and challenge the powerful, bravery is contagious, and it catches on, and that's inspired me and our team to stretch beyond our limits, to sort of find our voices and then to take on the challenge. And I have to be grateful for that, even though all the massive challenges. It's been a massive privilege to be able to devote my time into this cause and into this film, and to meet and talk to all of these incredibly brilliant people.
Well, the hard work absolutely shows, and the award was well deserved. Thank you so much, Kym. It was amazing to have you on, and apparently the commenters loved it too. So thank you so much. Guys, we're back live again in 5 hours at the Moscow NATO Weapons Expo. Moscow NATO Weapons Graveyard Expo. I don't know what it is, but Chay's in Moscow, and we're going to the NATO expedition. Thanks again, Kym. It's been another episode of the DD Geopolitics podcast or live stream. Go to ddgeopolitics.com. Have a good night.
My pleasure. Thanks very much, Sarah. Take care.